Hello,
Right.
everybody. Hello,
In the
and
room.
welcome to Fitness Unfiltered. We are very excited today. I am here with my wonderful co-hosts, Dan and Emma, as always, and the incredible Kimberley Wilson. Dan, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
Emma, how are you?
I'm also fine, thanks for asking.
I am also fine. And Kimberley, how are you?
I am mostly fine. I'm a
Mostly
little
fine.
bit tired, but I'm mostly fine.
Excellent. I'm very glad to hear that. Now, I don't want to kind of tell you things that you might already know, but sleep and rest are very, very important for brain function. So we will go into that later. But I was going to give an intro to Kimberley, but I have also, in the space of our pre-chat, this podcast, already discovered that I don't actually know very much about Kimberley, or I definitely don't know as much as I thought I did, when I just discovered that she has 3 masterses. What's the plural of masters? Masterses.
Must I?
Sorry.
Last
Well, anyway, I have been reading Kimberley's book, and when I say reading, I mean listening to, because as well as being an excellent authority on psychology and many other things, which we'll get into, Kimberley also, I think, has one of the best audiobook voices I have ever heard. So I've been really enjoying listening to her audiobook, How to Build a Healthy Brain. And I've already discovered in listening to that as well, that she occasionally throws in all these previous careers that she's had. So she's worked in management for an NHS mental health trust. She's worked for a corporate law firm. She has worked in the prison system. She has also obviously works now as a psychologist. She's been on the Great British Bake Off, no less, ladies and gentlemen. And obviously she's written this amazing book. So, and she's got 3 masterses. So Kimberley, what have I missed?
I think that's pretty much. I mean, that's more than enough to be getting on with, really, isn't it? Like,
is it, or are you just being modest?
Don't want to show off, do we?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's awesome. So, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Like, we're really, really excited to talk about this stuff. And I suppose we decided that the topic of this podcast would be the brain, and just talking about everything that goes along with it. How to Build a Healthy Brain is your book, obviously. So, tell us a bit about your book to start with.
It's really my one-woman public health campaign for the brain, because what doesn't make sense to me is, well, a few things. One is that we have a conversation about mental health which excludes the brain, right? We talk about mood, we talk about, keeping motivated, we talk about mindset, but we don't talk about the organ that underlies all of those functions. It's kind of bizarre. Like, we wouldn't talk about asthma or bronchitis or wheezing without talking about the underlying health of the lungs. So there's this way in which we talk about the functions of the brain without actually talking about it as a structure or as an organ that has these fundamental basic needs. And I kind of wanted to address that. But also, the diseases of the brain and mental health are our leading causes of global disability. So depression is a leading cause of global disability. In the UK, Alzheimer's, or dementia as the umbrella syndrome, is the leading cause of death. Yet most of the research funding and most of the public awareness campaigns are, acceptably and importantly, around things like heart disease, obesity, cardiovascular concerns and metabolic syndrome and all of that. There isn't a public health campaign for the brain. And it doesn't make sense when we've got rising rates of ill health in young people, we've got rising rates of Alzheimer's and dementia in the elderly, that we have across the board more people going off sick for depression than any other disease or diagnosis, that we're not talking about the brain more generally in our conversations about mental health. So rather than just complain about it on social media, I thought maybe I'll write a book.
Awesome. And it's a really interesting read. And I love how I think you described the brain as like the most advanced like machine
It's the most
on
complex
Earth.
structure in the universe. Like, there's nothing more complicated. And I say that for two reasons. One is that it means that it has some particular needs that we should pay attention to. But really, the thing that really, really gets me, and I don't know if, did I leave it in the book, The Man on the Train? It's basically, he represents a whole bunch of people who just don't understand the brain. But really think they do. So people stop me, and it's happened in all sorts of different places, and they say, what do you do? Oh, I'm a psychologist. Oh, you use therapy? Yeah, I do therapy. Oh, okay, well, I think you should be able to sort things out for yourself. Oh, all right. But I mean, the brain's quite complicated. Yeah, but I know myself. But you don't actually. I mean, most of the research says that you have lots of blind spots, and there are lots of things about yourself that you don't know. No, but I know me, I'll be able to sort it out for myself. And it's kind of like, there's no reason why you should. Your brain is the most complex structure in the universe. You don't understand your phone. Like, you don't understand how your phone works. Why would you think you can just, through sheer will and without any kind of reference, just understand your brain? You can't, you shouldn't expect yourself to. Don't put yourself under that pressure. Go to a professional, read a book, get some information, and just make life much easier for yourself.
And do you think that's maybe one of the blind spots that you're talking about, in the sense that, like, actually on some evolutionary level, if we actually tried to understand the brain, it would freak us out so much that it was that complex that actually we just wouldn't be able to function?
I sometimes feel like that about the universe. It's really interesting. Like, I can handle the brain, and maybe that's because it at least is physical, and I can get my head around the idea of like cells and little organelles and stuff. When I think about the universe, my brain does kind of shut down, because I can't quite fathom the notion of eternity, and but it just goes on. Like, when does it end? It doesn't end. But how? Like, it's too much.
Yeah, and there's like different galaxies and stuff. Like, it is
parallel universe. I can't deal. I just.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you on that, and I think that's again that is that overall running theme in the book, isn't it? Is about the intersection between physical brain health and mental health, and actually, like, I'm going to ask Dan and Emma, because I guess, like, we're all in this, I guess, like in medical school, they teach us a bit about the brain. So we do understand the bits about that. And it was actually made me shudder, like being reminded of action potentials and all of these words, like all these words kept coming up in the book that just made my heart sink a little bit, and just thinking, oh my God, I tried so hard to get my head around these about like 20 years ago. And then I'm lucky that I don't really need to know what they mean anymore. But do you guys, like, from the perspective of being in like the fitness space, and this is an industry where people are talking, I would say in the fitness industry, people have got more of a focus on mental health than they've got in a lot of other sort of spheres, because I think people have suffered with their mental health from things like, you know, excessive dieting and all of that kind of stuff. So people have really got this concept of mental health and the importance of mental health more than they have elsewhere. But do you feel that there is that you've noticed any focuses on physical brain health from in that sort of region?
I was just going to jump in actually before you ask that, Mike, and just say on that is that what I found really fascinating about your book, Kimberley, is just that I think when most people think about mental health and mental illness, they think about this from a psychological aspects point of view. But in terms of maintaining brain health, which was really refreshing, and I'm doing the same, I'm digesting your book through Audible at the moment, is the biological aspects. So when you talk about the biology in the interlinking things when it comes to the immune system and depression especially, that's so fascinating. And I wonder whether you could explore a bit more on that, if you could.
Yeah, the information theory of depression is really changing the game in terms of how we understand or what we think depression is. And I think it's worth starting out by saying, of course, that depression isn't a unitary disease. You know, my depression might be different from your depression, somebody else's depression, that because it presents in the same way doesn't mean it has the same roots. It might be linked to genetics, it might be linked to early life, it might be linked to stress, nutrition, movement, access to light, all of these stuff, or any combination of those. So, and that's why, slight segue, that's why it's like massively not helpful for people to just say, well, this worked for me, it will work for you, because really these things need a proper assessment to understand what's causing this person's depression. But what seems to be emerging is an underlying biological mechanism through which all of these different features act. So that early life stress might leave you more prone to stress hormone dysregulation, which turns on your inflammatory signals, and that inflammation, that chronically activated immune response is a marker, or can kind of affect the brain in such a way as it kind of presents as depression. That a poor diet can do the same thing. That relentless stress from work can do the same thing. Burnout does the same thing. That poor relationships do the same thing. So that inflammation is emerging as, at least for some people, we're thinking at the moment, maybe around a third of people with chronic depression, that there's an inflammatory role, there's an inflammatory element to it. And that makes a massive difference when we think about things like depression being such a global cause of disability worldwide, that if we can think now, instead of, because our old theories are around serotonin and maybe there's not enough serotonin in your brain and could you be making more serotonin, to actually, could we dial down inflammation in your body? Is that going to be a more effective way of improving your symptoms? Then actually we have a new way of potentially providing relief for a lot of people. And the research there is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And has the research shown yet if that is like a symptom or the cause? Because I worked previously on a study on chronic fatigue syndrome, and they were looking at trying to reduce the levels of inflammation in the blood via, I think it was, what's the extract from broccoli?
Sulforaphane.
Yeah, I think they were using sulforaphane. Anyway, but I sort of saw that as probably more, and maybe this is a different situation, but you're almost trying to treat a symptom as opposed to getting to the root cause of that inflammation. Like if you can then, could you stop that inflammation happening in some way? Or is it going to be a case of treating the symptom? And have they shown that reducing that inflammation does reduce depression?
Yeah, so we have causal mechanisms now for inflammation and depression in placebo-controlled trials. So what they've done is to take a bunch of people, half of them get saline placebo injection, the other get an injection of a lipoprotein, like a little extract, a piece of bacteria, at such a low level as they don't realize that they're getting it, obviously, but enough to activate the immune system. So the people don't report feeling ill, they don't report having any sort of response to the injection, but half an hour later they report worse mood, withdrawal, loss of enjoyment, all of the features of depression, and that correlates to the amount of inflammation. So the severity of their symptoms correlates the amount, the biomarkers of inflammation in their bloodstream. So we have a causal mechanism, and then essentially in the intervention trials where things like exercise and heat exposure and nutrition, that's understood to be the mechanism where actually, because all of these things act on the inflammatory response, that when people see improvements, it's because it's acting on those pathways.
I think it's, from what I see in the fitness industry especially, is no one really addresses the biological level sort of side of things. They're thinking about it more from the psychological aspects, as in, let's help motivate people, let's be all happy clappy, almost, I don't know whether it's the right phrase, I've used it before, the toxic positivity element of it, as in cheer up, crack on, we're all in this together, yeah, good vibes only and all that. They don't really address those biological aspects, and specifically what we can do from a nutritional point of view, perhaps, to alleviate some of that thing, because there is no calorie deficit fat loss equivalent to our mental health and mental well-being. It's so much more complex than that.
But if they do address those nutritional things, it's just stuff that doesn't, eat your
veggies, eat some more fruit.
It doesn't necessarily be backed by research. Yeah, superfoods. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or turmeric and things. And what's really fascinating about hearing about that is that actually, if you think about the problems with mental health stigma and things, is that this not only addresses that, because it, if that information is out there more, it will make people understand that this is more than a psychological disorder. exactly. And also it gives potentially treatment options as well, like very, very potential ways of improving it. And I think what worries me about that is because that's the thing, is that inflammation is a massive buzzword at the moment, isn't it? And a lot of people talk about it and talk about how to combat it. In terms of the research that is available, what is there that tells us how to combat that sort of stuff at the moment? What are the actual evidence-based methods of improving that we can actually start recommending to people, or are there any yet?
Well, it's tough because most people won't know what their inflammatory status is, right? Most people, unless you're having blood tests and finding out what your cytokine levels are. And even then, we need to know what your baseline levels are, So there's still some work being done to understand, for example, in a group of people with depression, which ones of those will be responsive to inflammation. So like I said, it seems to be a subset around 30%. So you've first got to identify those people and then work out, what's causing that inflammatory response, right? Because it can be lots of different things. It can be stress. Stress really turns it on. It can be lack of sleep. Lack of sleep can really turn on your immune system within a couple of days. So the idea is really a broad spectrum lifestyle approach that you just look after yourself, or you just look after your brain. You make sure you're getting enough sleep. You try to eat a nutritionally dense but enjoyable dietary intake. You try to manage your emotions and take care and invest in your relationships. You try to move regularly, and that hopefully that both as a kind of combined effect, but maybe if one of those in particular is important to you, you'll hit the target and get a beneficial outcome. So at the moment, the best thing is just a kind of more integrated all over approach.
Like that. And that's I think what's missing from the world at the moment is that simplistic overall look at things, rather than saying, take this supplement, do this special exclusion diet, have this detox, which is I think what we're still struggling with, is that people want a magic bullet, and in reality the answers that we have available to us are far less sexy and far less exciting sounding. Like, just look after yourself, brilliant. It is actually so much easier, but people want these more complex answers, and they don't only want to have them, people want to give them as well. So I think that's what makes it tricky. I was going to ask about sleep, because one of my, again, another big favorite quote in the book was something that, like, the most impactful thing that you can do to preserve your to have, I've written it down. I'm getting it because I wrote it down in my notes while I was stopped at traffic lights. And it said, in maintaining brain health, there is no more comprehensive intervention than sleep. Tell us about that.
All right. So where to start? Well, I do a lot of thinking and work around Alzheimer's disease as a kind of model for brain aging, because lots of the features of an aging brain kind of are accelerated or impaired in Alzheimer's disease. And one of those key ones is the brain's clearing, like, sewage system, essentially. So your brain builds up, you can think of it like a factory in this sense, in that, you're doing lots of work, you're producing lots of compounds and neurotransmitters and doing all sorts of stuff, and you build up waste as a function of that, and it builds up in between the cells. It's not massively helpful in between the cells because that's where the signals are carried, so you quite like to have clear spaces in between the cells. So your brain can clear the buildup of kind of metabolic gunk throughout the day, but the rate of clearance is doubled during deep sleep. And that's really important because one of these key proteins is called amyloid beta, and it builds up, and it's one of the characteristic features of Alzheimer's disease. It builds up in between the brain cells, it blocks the communication, and that's a real problem because your brain, like all parts of your body, likes to be very efficient, and if something isn't being used, it will shut it down. Like, that's, it's a pathway we don't need anymore. Let's not waste any more energy maintaining it. We'll just shut it down. So if the signals can't get through, then these nerve cells start to atrophy. And that atrophy, that brain shrinkage, is a key feature of Alzheimer's disease. So making sure you're keeping those spaces clear is really important. And what we see is this quite close relationship between poor sleep, sleep disorders, and the onset of sleep disorders, and increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And one of the ideas behind that is that if you're not sleeping properly, if you're regularly not getting enough sleep or enough deep sleep, you're impairing that clearing process, and your brain isn't able to get rid of that biological gunk, and therefore your brain isn't able to function as efficiently.
And what's the sort of time period that would happen over?
Well, it's a few hours. So in the deep sleep parts of your cycle, so it will go on and go off with your sleep cycle. But essentially, you'll want a full kind of good night's sleep, whether that's 7 hours for you or whether that's 9 hours for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we've moved on a little bit. We have this kind of societal apathy towards sleep almost, and it's you sleep when you're dead, and everyone should be able to, if they want to push on in life, survive with 4 hours sleep. It's one of those stats I found on the internet, but I think it was Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, for example, claimed to have 7 to 8 a night, and then there was Donald Trump that has 3, which might explain a little bit. But it's really interesting because I think generationally people are now moving on, and there's a new respect for the amount of sleep you get. I know certainly as I've got older, I appreciate my sleep a little bit more, whether that's a need for it or physical need for it. But yeah, it's people are more recognizing the benefits of getting better quality sleep, and they're investing in things like blue light blockers we see in the fitness industry. They're getting into strict sleep hygiene routines, and that they do actually look like they're buying into the process a little bit more. But that, everything you said kind of reiterates that. So it's good to see people shifting that mindset with it.
Yeah, I think it's been great, and I think Matthew Walker's book did an awful lot for that. But it's also worth knowing that sleep changes your personality. It makes you see the world as more hostile than it is. So with people who have not had a good night's sleep, if you show them ambiguous faces, so faces where you're not sure whether the person's smiling or a little bit surprised or a little bit angry, people who've had a poor night's sleep are much more likely to interpret those faces as hostile. So it starts to shift the way that you see the world. It also makes you much more risky. So, and actually you have much less insight into your risks. And that's where it comes into a problem. If you're driving, you think, actually, I'm fine. Actually, you have no insight and you're going to be taking more risks. And that's partly why you're so dangerous if you're kind of drowsy driving. But it also makes your emotions more labile. So, and that's both the peaks and the troughs. So, the way it's sometimes, if you've had to, pull an all-nighter, you're a bit manic, like everything's a bit hyper, or you just feel miserable and you don't want to talk to anyone or look at anyone or just be connected to the world in any way. It makes your emotions cycle much more intensely. Yes. So many features, not just of your brain health, but just of your mental health and your personality, are affected by the quality and quantity of sleep that you get.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I imagine that links into, because what I wanted to specifically ask you as well is, we've got this habit where we all, we ruminate, we catastrophize, especially with everything going on in the world now. Like, why do we do that? Why do we put ourselves through that?
The big question of the world.
Sorry.
What's wrong with me, Kimberley?
Yeah, fix me. This was just my therapy session, right? I'm not sharing this with anyone.
No, I need an answer to this question as well, please.
Okay, so there are lots of things that we can think about rumination. So rumination is the idea of that we just cycle over and over and over and over and over on the same thought. I think I did either a post or a story recently. I've been doing a series on thinking, and people often mistake rumination for thinking. They say, oh, I'm overthinking. It's like, no, you're not thinking because you haven't come to a resolution. You're ruminating and you're going around in circles. So that can be related to the state of sleep that your brain has had, because rumination is often associated with parts of the brain that are about emotions, so the limbic areas of the brain, and also the default mode network. You might need that. And essentially, when you're tired, when you're overtired, the front part of your brain that does reason and logic and let's think about this and settle down and it's all right, we can work it out, goes to sleep, like, and just stops talking to the limbic part of your brain, which is catastrophe, awful, this is going to be, I can't cope. So really you'd like those two parts to be both awake and talking to each other. But when you're overtired, your PFC kind of goes offline and you're left only with your catastrophizing limbic system that's just trying to keep you alive, bless, but is slightly not fully equipped to do it all by itself. But also rumination, I think, maybe just a kind of personal theory, linked to increased isolation, because I've been talking a lot about how thinking is a shared endeavor. And that your thinking is better, the quality of your thinking is better when you can do it with somebody else. Essentially, that's therapy, right? That you've been trying to deal with this stuff all by yourself, and actually what you need is an objective outside person, somebody else's mind, to give you a little bit more space in order to look at the idea from a different angle. And so I wonder whether this increased rumination or catastrophizing, maybe parts of the rises in anxiety that we're seeing, are linked to the ways in which we're, particularly in urban environments, just much more isolated and much more on our own, and we move away from family and we barely get to see our friends. But also and potentially as a feature of social media, much more competitive. Like, we don't want to talk to each other about how we're not having a good day, and we don't want to admit if we're struggling, because everyone's supposed to be living their #best life ever. And if I admit that I'm struggling, am I not doing as well as everybody else? And therefore, do I have to just deal with it by myself and get happy? And then when I'm happy, I can tell people post hoc how I was sad last week, but now I'm all right. So I wonder whether it's actually a feature of our kind of social landscape as well, social technological landscape.
And do you think that, like, because the echo chambers of social media, because I think that impacts that as well, because a lot of the time when someone is like, oh, look at this really horrible person who said something really mean to me, instead of people going, oh, I'm sure she didn't mean it, or he didn't mean it, that wasn't meant to be like specifically about a female, but I'm sure they didn't mean that, and then instead of that we get, oh yeah, they're a really terrible person, you should definitely not speak to them ever again, and everyone piles on, and it's almost like, I kind of feel like you need your views to be challenged in a constructive way, whereas we either get on social media, we either get our views supported or we get them challenged in a non-constructive way, and that is really not constructive to kind of actually formulating the reality of what's going on in those interactions. And I wonder if that's what ends up amplifying those situations so much. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think also just overwhelm. I think there are too many opinions, and it's difficult to kind of find your way through the fog, because everyone with a phone has an opinion and thinks not only that it's right, but also that everyone else in the world deserves to. So we're kind of, and I'm convinced that it's just too much. That there's a kind of evolutionary theory that our brains can handle about 150 social interactions, and the idea was that was roughly how big our tribes were, and if tribes got bigger than that, then they split off, and that seems to make sense in terms of the size of businesses that work, blah blah blah. So the idea that you follow several hundred people, or you can say something and have several hundred people give you feedback, I think it's just overwhelmed. I don't think the brain's kind of set up for it. And I think maybe not rumination, maybe that's feeding to rumination, but maybe it just kind of causes you to collapse into yourself. It's just not normal.
There's a book, actually I forget the author, but I think it's called The Magpie Effect, and it was specifically, he wrote about thought interruption. So as we're formulating our own thoughts, is almost, we don't see those to any end, because as we scroll through social media, we've got so many interferences from different parties that, we never, we never almost have a breather away from that because we're so entwined in it.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think absolutely that. How often do you, I mean, I guess you guys have this, but how many spaces do we have to sit and have a long conversation with someone that's uninterrupted, where you're not at least thinking about your phone or looking at your phone, or as soon as they get up and go to the toilet, you're checking your phone, like where we create the space to just have a kind of quality, meaningful connection with somebody else, but also just to think with them.
Yeah. Did you watch Social Dilemma? I saw you mentioned it on your stories.
Yeah,
what did you think?
I thought it was. I don't know if it kind of confirmed the things I was already thinking in that sense. I was like, oh, and a lot of those things. I think a couple of the quotes, certainly the one from Sean Parker, is in the book. The idea that they're just hacking your psychological vulnerabilities. So I think it's worth getting the information out. And I think the point that it really made, and that needs to be made more, is the effect of the algorithms in pushing people towards greater echo chambers, but also the extremes of their own thinking. Because as Mike said, that if you're just having all of your thoughts, but also then all of your biases and your stereotypes and your beliefs reconfirmed, then you have no reason to cross the boundary and see things from another perspective. Like, you're just getting everything, it's like you're walking down the street and getting applause for just being you. Like, it's just,
that is social media.
I love that.
So I think, and the problem with that is that it's just so satisfying, isn't it? It's lovely when people agree with you. We're like, yeah, you're so right. You're like, yeah, I am, aren't I?
And then you feel more offended when someone doesn't agree with you. Like, if you write a post, everyone's like, yeah, this, and all of that kind of stuff. And then someone goes, oh, I don't really agree. I'm like, what do you mean you don't agree? This is outrageous.
These other comments.
Exactly. Look, it's true. Everyone says.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so satisfying, and it's so like stroking of the ego, that you have to actively remind yourself that that's A, not massively helpful, but B, seek out opinions that diverge from yours. Like, remind yourself that people think differently from you, and that's not just okay, but it's essential, because we need that balance.
Do you think social media exploits vulnerabilities in people and heightens things and insecurities that are already there?
Yeah, 100%.
Short answer to that one. Absolutely.
All of it, all of the little dopamine hits, the need for, I mean, it's extraordinary to think that we're in a situation now where someone can feel that they can quantify their popularity, right?
The ultimate vanity metric, isn't it?
Can you imagine? Like, how popular are you? Oh, I don't know. My friends like me. My mum's nice to me. I don't know. I seem to get on all right with most people. Now, how popular are you? Well, I've got this many thousand followers. So we have this really extraordinary way in which we can, appear to, and this is the problem, we appear to be able to quantify our popularity / our value in society. That's where it's really dangerous, because at the point where we start to connect our value with our number of followers or the number of likes that we get, the more then we externalize the things that we care about and our behavior, and we separate ourselves from things that are meaningful, from our values, from our ideals, from our actual beliefs, and start to just kind of contort ourselves to satisfy the algorithm, satisfy what people will like,
You did actually a really good post today about about debating with people and how to kind of how to actually discuss things with people. Like, do you think it is possible to have meaningful debate online, sort of in the context of social media with people? It's a loaded question, isn't it?
I really don't think so. I really don't think that social media are the appropriate fora for proper, good quality, good faith debate. Certainly not Twitter. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is, again, kind of biologically, evolutionarily, we have the most expressive faces of any kind of our primate relatives, right? Our facial expressions are so important to our communication. That non-verbal communication makes so much difference to the tone. Now, I can say something quite sharp to you, but if I say it like this, you'll take it, you know, a bit more gently than if I say it like this. So that the way that you use your face and your facial expressions makes a difference to the way that we convey and the quality of our communication. And so straight off, you're not getting that. The second part, the very specific part of that though, is eye contact. And we know that when you're not making eye contact with people, you're able to be much more aggressive, because you forget that there's a human on the other side. So you end up almost automatically dehumanizing the person on the other side. And when you dehumanize someone, it's much easier to attack and dismiss and demean them. Also though, it gives you absolutely no thinking space, like the immediacy of it, right? And again, that's about bringing the prefrontal cortex online, the front part of your brain, which is like, let me see if this person has a point. I'm asleep on that, and come back to you. Like on social media, the emphasis is on immediate responses, and your immediate responses tend to be emotional ones. They tend to be my hurt, my anger, sometimes my joy, but the emotions that motivate us the most tend to be anger and defensive emotions. And so you throw those out there, and even if you later want to retract it, it's already done its damage, because somebody else would have received it, and now they're responding with their hostility, their defensiveness, their aggression, and it just becomes this kind of arms race to the most hostile position. So I'm not hopeful.
It ends up in the position when no one longer cares what's right. They just want to be right, don't they?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what I think we need, which is kind of what's behind all of these most recent posts that I've been doing, are just more offline conversations, or more opportunities for people to think in public. If we're going to have a televised debate, we need to have it, allow it to be an hour, you know, put it on YouTube, let people have the time to stop and think. Don't get one person with one extreme view against someone with another extreme view on a breakfast show for 7 minutes and expect that to be a quality discussion. It's never going to be a quality discussion. They're not going to have any time to understand each other's opinions. You can't even get terms of reference from that point. Do we agree on the definition of what we're talking about? You can't do that in 7 minutes. And so it just feeds into a kind of soundbite environment where your goal, your job is just to say the most clickbaity, soundbitey thing, because that's going to be the thing that goes around Twitter in your little video later on that day, in order to, again, gain as much applause or, you know, agreement from your side. It's never, those sorts of discussions are never about actually coming to a compromise, because compromise is boring.
Yeah. You make a good point as well about, like, the BBC will get someone who's like, I don't know, pro diet culture, and then someone who's completely anti-diet, when actually the answer lies in the massive grey area in between. And if they had someone who was more moderate, then they might get, you know, a better conversation out of discussing each of the extreme views. But you always want, like, someone who's like, global warming doesn't exist, you know, someone like who's like so like far in one direction. Yeah.
Up with an oil baron, and it's like you poison them because they can't agree, and it's just, it's nice, and for the company, it's going to draw, you know, everyone's going to be watching, and you're going to get your advertising revenue or whatever. But actually the long-term effects are, we just see two people arguing, and it just makes us feel like the world is much more hostile than it is, or than it needs to be.
And in reality, if you just had an expert,
like, so I was going to say, like, could you imagine, like, I don't know, say the election, and you have two people who are like, even if they agree, like, we're basically the same, we agree on most things, but like the choice is really just like these very small details, or like, do you like my jumper more? Like, there's not really much to choose. Whereas you always get like a very different views, and even if they weren't that different, like you have to almost make out like they are, like, oh, if you're for this, then you need to vote for this person, which is completely different than this person. And it's kind of a shame that there's not more like middle ground there.
I think that's the mess of the two-party political system, isn't it? It's like you then have to assume that, say, someone who wants, I don't know, a certain system of for small businesses also believes this about the church, also believes this about reproductive rights, also believes this. Like you have two choices. And of course there are going to be some people who believe in a welfare state but also have different views about severity of punishments in prison, and you don't get a space to find out how much we agree. What do we agree on? Okay, let's see if we can find a way through that. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's
like when you do those online questionnaires, every election, I always do the online questionnaire about like who I should vote for. And it just asks you all of these questions about like you say, about prisons and about this. And I just want to write, but I don't really care about like carrots. So I don't really want to base my whole decision on who is like up for growing more carrots or whatever. But then you put it in and they're like, well, you're 25% BNP. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm 25% BNP? And like, where did that come from? And then that's literally because it said some question about how, like, do you feel that, small businesses should have harsher employment contracts or something like that? And it will be, and it's like, no, but I need to know which bit, because I also need to, like, it's so, like, that's the point, is that there is such a range of different views and different opinions. And the problem with social media and that is that we just pigeonhole everybody. Like, are you anti-diet or are you pro-diet? There's nothing, like, you can't discuss in between. You can't say this. You can't say whether you're,
nutritionally agnostic doesn't really have a sexy twang to it, does it?
Exactly. And it's just, it's boxing everybody off, isn't it? And I think that only leads to more extreme views, because once you feel like you have to identify with this group of people, you then feel like, you then just become more and more exposed to their indoctrination about whatever it is that they feel super strongly about. And then you then find it harder to see those grey areas, when in reality, like, moderate people should be able to understand the arguments on both sides and go, well, these are the pros and cons for this, and this is where we have a problem with diet culture, and this is where we have other problems with regards to health related problems related to obesity and things, and this is how I think we might be able to balance those. But I accept that other people might disagree, and it doesn't really work on Instagram, does it?
Oh, just on that, Kimberley.
It really does.
So, sorry, I was just going to ask you on that, because I think that in terms of self-preservation, because people, as you said, that they do tend to see the world as a scarier place than it is possibly. What are boundaries, and what can we do better to maintain healthy boundaries with other people?
In the world, or on the social media world?
I think social media, but also maintaining healthy relationships, probably especially with COVID now, when people probably feel they should be there for friends and family as well, but also dealing with their own stuff. So maintaining healthy relationships with your loved ones, I think, probably, and social media space.
Yeah, I think boundaries are a bit of a buzzword as well at the moment. It's really funny.
I'm sorry.
So there's so much of this stuff that starts off in the therapy room kind of finds its way onto Instagram in the form of a meme, and suddenly everyone's giving you top 10 tips on maintaining boundaries. And so I guess, so boundaries and relationships. So what's really interesting, and what I see a lot, is that people worry that having boundaries, which is basically just about kind of standards for yourself, is another way of saying it. What is the standard that I set for myself? How will I allow myself to be treated? And what will be the consequences if I feel that those standards have been crossed? And so people often feel, or sometimes don't even realize, that they have the right to set boundaries. So quite often, and I'll speak to lots of people with regards to their relationship with their own bodies, and they will have, say, a parent or an auntie or a grandparent who, whenever they walk in the room, is like, oh, you've picked up a little weight.
That's definitely a cultural thing, because I remember whenever I went to Cyprus as a kid, I'd get grilled on not being fluent in Turkish, and I'd get, oh, you've put on weight or you've lost weight. It'd always be that.
That's why every family gathering, I always would go, I wonder if I've put on or lost weight this time. And it never had any relation to whether you've actually put on or lost weight. Like, you could know I've lost weight, or you could know you've put on weight. They'd be like, you've lost so much weight since I've last seen you. I'm like, it's not true.
Sorry, that's my fault. Sorry.
You see, right? People can relate. So, and people don't realize, and sometimes there's a question about, sometimes there's like 80-year-old aunties, and is it worth trying to sit them down and have a conversation about boundaries? You need to make a decision about that. But certainly, people don't realize that you're allowed to say, "Hi, mum, dad, auntie, cousin, sis. I'd really like it. In fact, what I need from you is not to talk about my body. I know you mean it kindly. I know you mean it, as a compliment, but I just don't like any comments about my body." And the idea of that for a lot of people is just not just kind of revolutionary, but for some reason it feels mean, as if you're stopping people from expressing themselves, when actually no, it's your body. In the same way as I don't want you telling me if you think I'm more attractive this week than you thought I was last week. Like, I don't need to hear it. Like, you're welcome to keep that opinion to yourself. So the boundary is just about saying, this is what I accept for myself, but boundaries only work if you enforce them. So that's, mum, dad, auntie, I need you not to talk about my body, and if you do talk about my body, I will leave the room. And then you have to follow through, because if you don't, then your boundary means nothing.
I'm getting palpitations thinking about actually following through on this discussion with some people. But carry on.
Well, this is it, right? And you think, but this is your body.
I know.
You should be able to set the line for it. What does it mean that you feel like you can't say, please don't talk about my body?
Yeah.
And this is how the boundaries become very, very blurred and sometimes enmeshed. I work with a number of people who really do not feel in possession of their own bodies. They don't feel they have the right to say anything about it. Their bodies have always been up for public conversation and discourse, even at the dinner table, by different people, and they've just had to sit there and take it. And so they don't even have a conception that it's not okay for other people to do it. So boundaries are really about standards, and setting that line for yourself, and then following through. Like, there is no boundary without follow through. But it's really important, because what you do is that you demonstrate to yourself that you're worth sticking up for. It's an act not just of self-care, but also of almost self-defense. It's like the way that you would look after someone more vulnerable than you. You wouldn't want them to be picked on. You wouldn't want them to be bullied. And so you step up for them. It's doing that for yourself. And the more you do that, the more you almost tell yourself that you're worth sticking up for. It's really important for self-esteem. Didn't answer your question at all, though, did it?
No, that's all right. I was just going to then make it my own therapy session. I was going to talk to the child Dan in me, and you won't do that.
You know what would be amazing is to see, like, I don't know, like a 10-year-old just be like, I would prefer if we didn't discuss my body.
I just love it. Oh my God. I can't wait. It would be so good. And then we just learn to respect each other. Okay,
yeah.
You don't want me to talk about your body. That's all right. We can talk about something else.
What are your thoughts on, I don't know whether this is the right terminology or another buzzword I've picked up off Instagram, in terms of like removing, is that the right word? Toxic people and distancing yourself from those in your life, those that negatively impact everything in terms of how you feel about yourself and your value in the world and your self-worth and everything like that. Is that a healthy way to deal with that sort of thing?
Well, yes and no. And it comes down to your definition of a toxic person, right? So there are some people are friends with bullies. Some people are friends with people who are just not nice to them, who take advantage of them, who exploit them, who talk about them behind their back, who make them feel fundamentally unsafe. But for some reason they feel that they need to be nice, that they should be polite, that this is a relationship they should just keep just in case. I would consider something in that realm as toxic and not serving you, and you probably you're probably best off trying to find a way either to address that relationship. So maybe you talk to that person, maybe this person doesn't know that the way that they are, the way that they talk to you is hurting you. And that actually what we need is an honest conversation about this is how I'm affected by what you say. Do you understand that this is how it comes across, and we can come to a better understanding of each other? If you can do that, then actually relationships can really flourish. And again, you demonstrate to yourself that you can stand up for yourself. So there's a realm of, yes, some toxic relationships are real and some people are toxic, etc., etc. But sometimes people will define a toxic person as someone who just disagrees with them. And then we're in a bit of trouble, because
that's everyone.
Right, exactly. So if I say, so I was talking to someone, and because this is, it blew up on Twitter. There was a bit of a row between social media influencers, and I said, I think I'd like to hear both sides of the story. And that was too much for one person. One person said, well, you're obviously on their side and you're one of the enemy, da 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 da. And I became a toxic person for that person because I didn't agree with them. And so whilst for me, I was just trying to facilitate a conversation, to them, I'm this kind of hostile, toxic person who is, I don't know, just out to disagree with them for no good reason. So I think it's worth being clear on why you think that this person is toxic, and are you just condemning someone? This often happens in black and white states of mind. Are you just condemning someone because they disagree with you, or they've told you that you're wrong, or they are friends with someone you don't like, and therefore you're trying to call them toxic rather than deal with what might be happening internally for you?
Yeah, so you have to be quite self-aware, which I think is something that's so hard to do. And I think a lot of people are like, I'm really self-aware, but you're like, are you though? And like, are you your own self-awareness or your own views on things? Like, okay, if this person is toxic to me, why do I think they're toxic to me? And that's probably a question we don't really ask. We just think, oh no, they've done it, like that's how they make me feel, my feelings are valid, and not questioning why you're feeling the feelings that you're feeling.
I often get it the other way around. Like I often get other friends of mine going, why do you hang out with that person? They're awful.
Who's been saying that about us, Mike?
Oh, so many, especially you, Dan. You're so hostile. And I'm just like, but I don't think they're that bad. Like and I'll be like, oh, but they've got some redeeming features, and they're like, no, they're awful. Everything you've ever told me about them makes me think they're awful. And I usually have a bit of a rule of thumb that I've started to just think I'm a terrible judge of character, and I sort of just started to think, okay, if 3 people tell me someone needs to be out, then maybe I'll consider it. But that's just, I find that process of like when someone messages you who you've not seen for ages and is like, oh, let's meet up for coffee or whatever, I find it really difficult to go, no thanks. I've been okay. I don't want to. So I just go, yeah, cool.
Mike, why do you find it difficult?
I think I find it difficult because I find like interactions where I am going to end up not being liked difficult. I think my issue is worrying too much what people think of me, and actually I worry that I'm getting it wrong. So I worry that I'll cause hurt to somebody who didn't deserve that hurt, because actually they might be one of those people who you mentioned who means well and who doesn't really understand that what they're doing isn't awesome, and I haven't necessarily got the guts to have that conversation with them to tell them that. So I kind of think, well, I best just give them the benefit of the doubt and crack on. So yeah,
there's a chapter in the book, I don't know if you've got up to it, about having difficult conversations.
Yeah, I know. I'm already cringing because I know I that's probably the thing that I'm worst at.
Like I get to the point, like if I know that a friendship is over, or I don't want someone in my life, sometimes I don't bother having the conversation. Like if I wanted to salvage a friendship, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to have this difficult conversation where actually you've made me feel this way. If things don't change, then I don't know if we should still be friends. Whereas if I'm like, no, it's like I don't want them in my life anyway. Do you need to have the conversation? I don't know. I'm normally just like
kind of stressed out, like. I think sometimes, obviously, friendships, like relationships, fizzle out, right? And you're like, yeah, you've been gone for 6 months, and I haven't really missed you. I haven't really thought about you. That's fine. Like, to me, that seems fairly mutual. That's fine. It would be different if the person was like, "Hey, so Emma, what's going on?" And you're like.
Emma's full savage though. Emma would just be like, "No,
I
thanks."
am really savage.
No, but
I don't know
Emma, you've got really good boundaries. I'm using the buzzword.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have great boundaries.
No, like as in you are, and I mean that genuinely in terms of like if we know or I know you've got time allocated for work, you're like, right, that's work time, and I will get back to you after that when it's good for me. And I do have massive respect for that with people as well.
See, this is the thing. That's the thing about boundaries is people think, oh, it'll look like I'm being mean, or people will think like I'm a horrible person or I don't have time for them. Actually, people see it as a sign of self-respect, and we respect people who respect themselves. So it's exactly that. You're like, oh, okay, Emma knows what she's about. She is organized about her time. She knows what her boundaries are, and I will respect that because she respects herself. So, yeah.
Yeah, and because you ain't got a choice.
It's that or be blocked with Emma.
Exactly.
But
I think that's something like in terms of, especially if you're self-employed, it's so important. Like I spent a long time trying to like please other people because it's like, well, you can work whenever you want because you're your own boss. And it's like, yeah, but not going to have much of a business if I just like, so I think having that. Yeah. Knowing like your boundaries, especially.
You set a precedent, I find, like just speaking openly about clients in the past. I'm talking about many years ago. If you're texting back at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night, that's you set up then for the foreseeable.
Yeah.
You could expect 10 o'clock texts on a Sunday night every Sunday.
But that's where, when you've got a physical business that has opening hours, it's very easy to have those boundaries because the lines are closed at that time, and that's the only way that they can contact you. And that's I suppose something that is always hard in that online space because you're using like people know that you've got your phone with you. They know that you're on your phone, and then that creates that expectation, which is just quite difficult to overcome, I think. And that's why I think like in those sorts of situations, like clear boundary setting and expectation setting at the beginning is so important. Like you always see people, when it comes to so many of these kind of client coach sort of relationships, so much of the fallout seems to come from expectation. Like if people expect you to reply within 20 seconds of receiving a text, then they'll be livid if you've taken an hour to reply to it. But if you have it all clearly set out in your stuff to begin with, that text messages are welcomed but will be responded to within a week, then it's a kind of, I know, savage.
Yeah. And so the other thing about boundaries is that, and obviously in therapy we think about them a lot, is that they create the framework for what's about to happen, right? It's like, okay, well, these are the parameters. This is what you and I can expect. But it also means then that you don't have to worry. Boundaries actually reduce anxiety, like reasonable boundaries reduce anxiety, because I don't have to try to anticipate or second guess what's going to happen. I know that my session is at this time in this room for exactly this amount of time on this regularity. And, so I know what's happening, and therefore I don't have to hold responsibility for that. I can just get on and do the work. Boundaries are the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it takes away some of the responsibility, because if you've clearly stipulated your boundaries and, someone's put out by them without sounding too harsh, that's kind of on them if you've been clear from the off.
Plus, you're like, as a coach as well, if you're even the 10 p.m. example, like if we're saying to be your healthiest, both mentally and physically, you need to get to sleep, you need to turn your phone off. Like, you shouldn't be encouraging them to reply at 10 p.m. anyway. So by setting your own boundaries, you're also showing them, like,
leading by example.
Exactly.
You, but it's also how I live my life as well. So I think that's a good thing. So I know that we're getting like close to an hour, but there's one thing I really wanted to ask, and this was it's a slightly off topic, but it's about menopause and mental health. And if you had any like research, interesting facts, or like advice generally around this area, they're probably laughing because I try and get someone on to talk about menopause all the time.
No, it's interesting. It's not that because we don't want anyone on. It's because we haven't been able
we can't
to.
find
Yeah.
the perfect person.
Oh,
we know we have found the perfect. Well, we think we found the perfect person, but she keeps saying yes, and then we keep stalling when
she's good on her boundaries. She's like, I don't want to talk to those guys.
She's too good at boundaries.
Ish. So it's not where I've kind of my specialty. I know a little tiny bit about it, particularly in relation to, again, Alzheimer's disease. Sorry to keep coming back to this one, guys. But women have twice the risk of Alzheimer's disease as men. And that's not because women live longer, it's because we lose the protective effects of estrogen after the menopause. So estrogen is neuroprotective, as well as there being receptors for estrogen in the basal ganglia, in the part of the brain that manages your temperature, so your hot and cold flushes is because of estrogen. Your mood and concentration, your prefrontal cortex, and your ability to focus, people complaining about brain fog and depression, that's because there are estrogen receptors there as well. So it's something, again, when we should be talking much more about brain health. We should be talking much earlier in the lifespan. People don't start thinking about their brains until their parent or grandparent starts to get ill, and then they start thinking, oh, maybe I've got one of those, I should get onto that. But the brain is a long game, and you should be, from as early as possible, like, consider it like a pension. Like, you should be putting into your brain from as early as possible. And maybe particularly women, because we have that higher risk, we should be really investing in the things that have been demonstrated to build increased brain volume, like regular exercise, like nutritionally dense dietary intake, like managing stress, all of those things to help mitigate what is likely to be an inevitably higher risk when we hit menopause.
Interesting.
Awesome. There's two topics that I still want to cover. Have we got time?
I don't think we've got time for cake.
What? Well, then let's forget about mental health.
That's what this has all been about.
Yeah, just a build up.
I was like, we've got to talk about carbs. Otherwise, what are we even doing here? Right. Let's do 30 seconds on anger. No, I'm joking. I would love to touch briefly on anger, because I think one of the best things I learned from you, because I had a very, I would say a very singular view about anger. And it was, I mentioned it in a post of mine on Instagram, and you commented on it and talked about the difference between the anger as an emotion and anger as an informant of behavior and aggression and that sort of stuff as well. And actually, for anyone listening, Kimberley's done an amazing podcast episode on this. So if you want to explore that in more detail, then definitely check out that episode. But can you just touch on that briefly for us here now as well?
Sure. Yeah, no, I would love to, because anger is my favorite emotion. I love it. Woo, woo. And I love it because I think it's really powerful and it's really important. But I think it has terrible PR. And therefore it's kind of really much misunderstood and much maligned. And I think particularly for women, and that's a real problem, because I think anger is the emotion of self-esteem. So what I mean by that is that anger, and that spark for anger, and it's worth separating anger from violence. So people often think they're the same thing, but they're not. You can be seething with rage and completely still, right? You can just be quietly stewing, or you can be flailing around. But anger and violence are separate things. So whether it's because someone's cut you up in the queue for Sainsbury's or on the road, or an oil spill from an irresponsible company, or whatever it is, anger is an indication of injustice, either injustice that you are experiencing or injustice that you see in the world, right? So it's a really important signal for something being unfair. it's unfair that I'm queuing sensibly and in a very good British way, and someone is just swiping in front of me. You're not following the rules. It's unfair. How you choose to respond to your anger tends to be the thing that differentiates people. But your anger simply is a clue to say, hey, something here is unfair, or I feel like I'm being treated unfairly. The problem that happens,
like a very British way to deal with it. Excuse me, I think this is unfair that you've cut in the line. Thank you.
Yeah, or passive aggression. The best.
That's my
passive aggressive comment.
No.
Just an exhale.
I'll just wait behind you then, shall I?
You're welcome. Yeah, all of that. All of that. But when you cut yourself off from your anger, as I think women do especially, I think women are socialized out of anger. It's seen as being childish. It's seen as being hysterical. It's seen as being emotional. It's seen as being out of control. And so I think women in particular are socialized out of legitimate expression of our anger. But if you do that, and so I work with a lot of women who are in this position, if you've cut yourself off from anger, what you've done then is to cut yourself off from the signal that you're being treated unfairly. Like you can't react to it. And so rather than saying, I don't want you to talk about my body because it makes me angry and I think it's unfair that you're making comments about me, you go, and so you persist in an environment, in a situation where you're being treated unfairly because you can't harness and access your anger. And so I think anger can be hugely powerful. And the example that I give in the book is Rosa Parks, who was furious. She was angry in her excerpts when she speaks about the bus protest. She says, I felt this blanket of anger come over me, but she expressed that anger through staying put, through sitting in her chair, by refusing to be moved. So she wasn't violent, she wasn't out of control, she wasn't an hysterical woman. She was an angry woman who was able to connect with that sense of injustice and then used that anger to fuel something incredibly powerful and incredibly important. So that's my big message, is really to not dismiss anger as an emotion or as something negative, but to really understand the message that it's giving you, to then be able to interrogate whether the situation is really unfair or if it's not, because it might be in your interpretation, but give yourself the space to think about it and then choose an appropriate mode of action.
I like that.
I've stolen that. I had to write that down. Anger is the emotion of self-esteem. And actually, there's a very good Outcast song called Rosa Parks as well. Just FYI.
I do need to move on to some important topics. So I think we just need a few quick fire questions about this. Okay. What is your favourite bread, please? What is your favourite form of bread and why?
Oh, what's the occasion?
So it's your last day on planet Earth and you can have one more bread.
Oh, what about, because I've seen you ask this actually, Kimberley, what about your final sandwich and what bread you would have with it?
All right, so my last bread on earth, the one that's come to mind, is a focaccia with lots of olive oil, maybe caramelized onion on top.
Okay.
Sandwich. All right. I love sandwiches.
I love sandwiches so much.
Have you been to Max's sandwich shop?
No.
Oh, mate.
Where is it? In London?
Yeah.
Oh, mate.
Oh, mate.
That was so wasn't expecting.
Why is it?
It's amazing.
Have you been to Jacobatzi's Italian Deli in Hampstead? Because basically, so I just will very quickly touch on this, but when I was in my 6 years of medical school, I went there as much as possible because it was just round the corner, and it was, I don't really know if I had a real gourmet like mouth for sandwiches at that point because my experience was limited, but it was basically like, if you were feeling flush with cash, you would have sun-blushed tomatoes and Bel Paese cheese on
Hang on,
ciabatta.
this isn't the student life I remember.
No,
Exactly. But this is why this was like an occasional. That was an occasional
like this
treat.
morning.
My treat, everyone.
So
my treat.
normally it would be like you would just get a tuna and salad on ciabatta. Like that was the cheapest sandwich, and was fine. But if you were feeling flush, like just very occasionally, it would just be the bel paese cheese, which I think is pretty much just Baby Bell anyway. But it was so marvelous with chili jam as well, and it was just incredible. But anyway, sorry, I actually now will let you answer.
I love your sandwich love, and this is the thing I love about food, is how people get excited about it, and like this is my favorite thing. Probably, what's coming to mind is some sort of rotisserie chicken with something crisp, maybe a kind of mustard slaw.
I love how we're going to taste and texture now as well.
Serious here. In probably a baguette, but one that hasn't gone soggy, one that's still slightly crisp on the outside. And where the chicken's still slightly warm, so it's only kind of just come off the rotisserie.
How do you not cut your mouth on the baguette? That's what I want to know.
That's like slightly, yeah, that's the thing. So like it still hasn't gone completely soft. It has a little bit of crunch.
I think if it's your last meal, you take the hit for the taste.
Actually, yeah, to be fair, that's a very good point, Dan. Very good point. Very good point. So then again, same question for cake.
Oh, there are so many. A cake that I really like, though, that really goes under the radar is the Pret lemon drizzle. Actually, very good. It's really moist, really almondy. It's lovely. Yeah, that's come to mind. I love a sticky toffee pudding. But I find them slightly hard work because I get halfway through and then I get the sugar headache, like right there.
Oh, really? I don't have that problem.
Yeah.
I've never had a sugar headache.
No, I don't think I have.
Kind of wish I did have sugar headaches. It would probably make portion control slightly easier.
I'm like, the sweeter hurts. It starts to hurt my head, which is a shame. So I have to stop and come back to it later. But also like never bring a coffee and walnut cake into my home.
I'm not a fan.
Oh, really?
Which is strange.
That's my mum's favourite.
I don't like. If it's the only cake available, I still eat it. I don't.
I wouldn't. I
really?
Wouldn't.
Gosh.
No.
That's big talk.
I know.
And so, like, because obviously at some point in the future, you very kindly attended Fitness Unfiltered Live as a speaker, and we were very happy to have you. But obviously when we do a real life conference where you will also be speaking, I mean, I'm going to ask you first because I know you've got boundaries, but you're going to be speaking.
Get me now, like make a public declaration.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, no going back now.
Nice.
So then my question for that is, what is the best cake that you think you make? And obviously, I would like you to confirm that you will be bringing it to that event.
How am I talking at your event and also make a cake for you?
Of course you are.
Yes. It's not too much to ask. You've given up over an hour of your time tonight as well, Kimberley.
I was so excited
online before.
because basically like a while back when the BSLM conference was going to be this big London event, Kimberley and I were both booked to speak at it, and I was like literally immediately, because it was on different days, I was like, please let me be speaking on the same day as Kimberley, and please let her bring cake. Those are the only two things that I care about.
I'm sure that's your literal thought every time you
but
go
then
anywhere.
COVID,
Who can I cook cakes for?
Exactly. But then COVID ruined my cake plan. So I have to think of an alternative method of making that happen. So just to confirm, Kimberley, what cake will it be, please? Thank you.
It might be, if it were to ever happen.
If you within your boundaries were happy to agree to this. Yeah.
Then it might be, I quite like doing a lemon and bergamot cake. But that is seasonal. So
okay. What season, just out of interest?
Spring.
The spring.
Yeah.
Spring. Okay, noted.
Yeah, Mike's like, January 22.
January isn't spring.
Oh, no, it isn't, is it? No, March.
No.
No cake for Mike.
Damn it, Dan. Right. This has been a really, really, really awesome discussion. Like, I've really, really enjoyed it. And I feel like we could just go on forever and just get more and more therapy for free out of you, as well as cake. But I think that all that is left is to say thank you so much for speaking to us. It's been
pleasure.
awesome.
Yeah,
And
thank you,
I've learned
Kimberly.
loads.
That was amazing. I enjoyed every second of that.
And for everyone listening, thank you for listening as well. And you can check Kimberley out at Food and Psych on Instagram. And is it the same handle on like Twitter and stuff?
It is, but I'm not very lively on Twitter at the moment because Twitter is a hellscape.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think, to be fair, most of the people that listen to this podcast, I think, are more of Instagram anyway. So Food and Psych on Instagram, and How to Build a Healthy Brain, available in book and also Audible audio book, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. And also the podcast as well. So thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything to say?
No, thank you so much.
Just thank you. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
And if anyone is listening and would like to give us a rating or a review, then please do so. And let us know if you have any questions. Tag us in your stories, and tell us about your favourite bread and cake. And we will chat more soon and see you next time. Thank you very much.